Hey guys, Comics Kid 2099 here, and recently I watched a movie, and I wanted to share my thoughts with you on the movie. The movie was Troy from the year... Can you see that? There we go. Troy from the year 2004, starring Brad Pitt, Eric Bana, Orlando Bloom. Those guys, their names are on the cover, but you've also got Rose Byrne is in this movie. I don't know how well known she was at this time. This was about 10 years ago. It was 10 years ago. After this, I think she was in 300, and then later on she was in X-Men First Class, so she's been in a lot more high-profile stuff since this movie, but I'll be honest, I didn't even recognize her when I watched the movie, so that's good for her, I guess, that she's able to literally disappear into a character. I mentioned Brian Cox, he's in this movie, he plays Agamemnon. As is probably obvious just from what you see here, this is about the Trojan War. Recently, I have been really getting into the Trojan War stuff. A lot of just Greek mythology in general. I've been kind of digging my way into it, and we've had this movie for a long time, and I just never watched it. If you will recall, a long time back, this was when I first started doing videos. I don't remember if it wasn't one of the very first videos I did, but it was fairly early when I started doing videos. I did a video where I talked about what I hate about this phenomena called real worlding, where like you will see a King Arthur movie where they take out all of the cool stuff, like taking the sword out of the stone, or all the supernatural elements like the Lady in the Lake and Merlin's magical powers, where they'll do a King Arthur movie like that, but they'll take out all of that stuff. And I would say, okay, then what's the point of doing a King Arthur movie if you're just going to take out all of the really cool stuff that people like about King Arthur? And I also mentioned Troy. I said Troy is a victim to this phenomena also because this is basically just a historically somewhat accurate war movie that doesn't have any of the Greek gods or anything like that. Achilles is not invincible everywhere except for on his heel. He's just a normal dude who happens to be really good at killing people. And I was kind of trepidatious going into this movie because of this phenomena of real-worlding stuff that was at one time really fantastical and kind of supernatural. I prefer the supernatural and fantastical stuff. That's why when I read and watch stories, I gravitate towards science fiction and fantasy stuff. I don't really want to read about something that's more real or something that could happen in the real world. And I guess this is low praise maybe, but I wound up enjoying it anyway for what it is. And like I said, it's basically just a war movie. Now, it's a pretty good war movie, I think. And also, before I get too far away from the topic of real-worlding, I might have said, when I did that real-worlding video back in 2012, I might have said that this movie ignored everything fantastical, and I might have even mentioned that the Trojan horse wasn't in this movie. Well, I don't know where I got that information, because the Trojan horse is in this movie. Now, it's pretty much played as realistically as it possibly could. It looks big enough to fit maybe 10 guys inside it, which, in the way that we see it happen, 10 guys is all that's needed to open up the city and allow the rest of the armies to come in. So that's not really a fantastical element, and the way that we see it enter into the picture is much more realistic than Poseidon giving this information to Odysseus, like what happened in the myths. Having said that, now that I'm done talking about the real-worlding stuff, I wound up really enjoying this movie. It's basically, if you are at all familiar with the Trojan War, the story is that Orlando Bloom's character, Paris, is one of the princes of Troy. And he and his brother Hector, the other prince, they are visiting Sparta, I believe, and King Menelaus has a wife, Helen. Well, Paris and Helen are secretly having an affair, and Paris convinces her to come back with him, and then she could just run away from everything. Well, Paris is basically an idiot, because after he does this, he openly admits that this really wasn't a good idea, and that he's brought war to his country. Well, yeah, you should have thought about that about 10 minutes ago. But anyway, Hector and his father also, they find themselves in between a rock and a hard place, because if they tell Paris to just leave and take her with them, they are still going to face war, because Menelaus, his brother, is Agamemnon, who is a jerk. He is the most unlikable character in this entire movie, and that's saying something considering Paris is a bloody idiot in this movie. Anyway, Agamemnon has just been aching for an excuse to go to war with Troy, and now that the Trojan prince has kidnapped the Queen of Sparta, he kind of has his excuse excuse. So even if they send Helen on her way, they're still going to come and they're going to try and make war with Troy. So basically, they have the choice of protecting this idiot brother of Hector's and then having to face war, or saying, no, we want no part of this, and still having to face war. So Hector is one of my favorite characters in this movie. He's basically just a really great guy who finds himself in a really bad situation where he has to go to war and he doesn't really agree with the reasons for fighting in this war, but he is still going to do it to the best of his abilities. And I really find that to be a very interesting kind of character. And then the other character that at first I didn't really like him at all, and I came to like him a lot more over the course of the movie, is Achilles, played by Brad Pitt. And he's basically, they only mention this about 8 million times in the movie, but his character arc is that he wants immortality, and not literal immortality. He just wants to be remembered for his deeds. So he will do these really impressive feats of strength so that people will remember who he is. And his mom even tells him, you could stay here, you could find a wife, and you could have kids, and they will love you, but then 20 years later, nobody is going to remember the name of Achilles. And they only mention this, like I said, they mention it a bunch. They really could have mentioned it about 3 times less than what they did, and we still would have gotten the idea. They didn't have to hit us over the head with it as much as they did in this movie. But basically, the only reason that Achilles even goes to war, because he hates Agamemnon, and rightly so, because Agamemnon is a jerk. The only reason that he goes to war and is working with Agamemnon is because he wants to be remembered. He wants to go into this battle, and he wants to do really great things, and then he will be remembered for centuries and thousands of years to come. And he is also an interesting character because over the course of the movie, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but he begins to realize that war is not as simple as he was making it out to be. When he first got there, he really didn't care who he killed. He just wanted to be remembered. And over the course of the movie, he realizes that things are not as black and white as he wanted them to be. Now, that's not to say that he was a stupid character at the beginning of the movie, because we find out at one point that he's a lot smarter than he acts. He acts like he's just a dumb brute, as one character in the movie says. He's a lot smarter than that, but we find out that he's got a very naive worldview. And then as the movie progresses, his worldview kind of changes, and there are things that kind of keep him from just pulling out of the war altogether, and I won't spoil those things for you. But this is a movie where you don't really have to worry about spoilers, because the events of the Trojan War are pretty well common knowledge. At least I think they are. But if you don't know anything about the Trojan War, then maybe you can go into this movie and you will have no clue what's going to happen. But a lot of the events in this movie, they're pretty well common knowledge, at least I think they are. And anyway, like I said, this may sound like kind of a backhanded insult, but I like this movie more than I thought I would. I did not think I was going to enjoy it, and I wound up really digging it, mostly for the performances. And also, it does a really good job of streamlining the Trojan War. Now, again, as far as I'm concerned, you can throw the most insane, wild, and crazy things into a story, and it's not going to bother me. You can have the Greek god of the ocean give Odysseus the idea to build a giant wooden horse that will take them inside the city. You can have a war that is going to take 10 years to fight. You can have Odysseus take 10 years to get home. None of that stuff is really going to bother me, but for some reason, whoever was making this movie, they thought that that was just crazy, so they should just do the story without all of that, which my question is, if you don't like those elements, then why even do the story? But having said that, they still do a pretty good job of condensing this huge story into an hour, 2-hour movie. I think it's a little over 2 hours. So they did a pretty good job of getting it all together, of only using the characters that are really necessary for this story, and then getting rid of characters who really aren't important. I tried to read the Iliad once. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before. I tried to read it. I don't even think I got a full page into the story, because it was collected together from oral accounts from Homer, and at the time, all of these characters were well known to the audiences already, so you didn't have to explain who these characters were to the audiences. So when you pick up the Iliad, it's already expected that you know who all of these characters are. And the good thing about this movie is that it doesn't expect you to know. It helps you along the way. It tells you who all these characters are, so you don't have to be expected to be an expert in Greek mythology going into this movie. And that's another really great thing about it. I've said all I have to say about this movie. I really liked it. If you haven't seen it already, I'd suggest watching it, because I think it's pretty good. So that's all I have to say. I hope that you guys enjoyed this review, and if you've seen this movie before, I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I will talk to you guys probably tomorrow with another review. So until then, I'll see you guys later. Have a great day.